Welcome, dear listener. Tonight we embark on a journey across the endless grasslands of Eurasia, into a world shaped not by towering monuments or ancient cities, but by the wind, by hoofbeats, and by the quiet power of the nomadic way of life. Long before the Golden Horde emerged, the vast Eurasian steppe was a stage for countless cultures: Scythians, Sarmatians, Huns, Turks, and Mongols. These peoples lived not within walls but in motion, their homes built from felt and wood, their lives defined by seasons and migrations. Their stories were not etched in stone but carried through oral tradition, passed down beside fires that flickered beneath wide open skies. The steppe is a realm of paradox, harsh and hospitable, empty and teeming with life. Its silence is broken only by the howl of the wind, the cry of a hunting eagle, or the low murmur of a caravan moving beneath the stars. It is here, in this vastness, that one begins to understand the roots of what would become the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde did not appear from nowhere. It was the product of centuries of evolution, of tribal alliances, of raids and trade, of power wielded not from palaces, but from the saddle. Its cultural DNA was inherited from generations of pastoralists who mastered both survival and sovereignty on horseback. But before we meet the Khans and conquerors, we must first understand the landscape that shaped them. The steppe was more than their home. It was their weapon, their fortress, and their legacy. Life here demanded adaptability, endurance, and an intimate bond with nature. Water was scarce. Trees were few, yet people thrived, moving with their herds, forging tools from bone and bronze, and navigating by stars and the sun. These nomadic peoples did not build empires in the traditional sense. They left behind few ruins, yet their impact reverberated across the ancient world. They traded with China, Persia, Byzantium, and the Islamic caliphates. They fought wars, brokered peace, and shaped the destiny of kingdoms far beyond their own borders. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine a rider cresting a distant hill, scanning the plains ahead. He is not alone. He is part of a culture that has endured through windstorms and winters, a people who speak in poetry and proverbs, who measure wealth in horses and honor in deeds. This first chapter is a meditation on the silence before the storm. It is the breath before the shout of empire. It is the soil in which the seeds of the Golden Horde were planted. From this land of whispers, history will soon roar. Let your mind wander now, through the grasses that hide ancient trails, along the rivers that once watered migrating camps. The story is just beginning. Before the Golden Horde swept across the western steppe, the lands it would come to rule were home to a mosaic of peoples and cultures. The history of these vast plains is not one of static civilizations, but of motion, of migrations, encounters, and exchanges that set the stage for the emergence of a powerful nomadic empire. For centuries, the Eurasian steppe served as a corridor between east and west, north and south. Nomadic tribes such as the Scythians roamed these lands in ancient times, known for their equestrian skills and distinctive art. They were followed by the Sarmatians, Alans, and other Iranian-speaking peoples, who adapted to the life of the open grasslands, developing sophisticated warrior cultures and complex social structures. In the early medieval period, Turkic tribes began to dominate the region. The rise of the Gök Turks in the 6th century marked the first large-scale Turkic empire, stretching from Mongolia to the Caspian Sea. Their successors, the Uyghurs, carried forward the legacy of organized steppe governance. They adopted writing systems, engaged in diplomacy, and established vibrant trade networks that extended from China to Byzantium. Other tribes came and went. The Khazars, who created a powerful polity near the Caspian and adopted Judaism. The Pechenegs and the Oghuz, who raided and traded along the fringes of the Byzantine Empire. The Kipchaks, known also as Cumans, who rose to prominence in the western steppe by the 11th century. These Kipchaks would become particularly important, as many of them would later be incorporated into the armies and society of the Golden Horde. The steppe world was constantly shifting. Tribal alliances formed and dissolved. Leaders emerged and fell. The boundaries of territory were drawn not with walls, but with movement. Herds migrating, warriors campaigning, envoys traveling. Cultures intermingled through intermarriage, diplomacy, and conquest. Even religion was fluid. Animism, Tengriism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all left their marks on steppe communities. By the 12th century, the western steppe had become a critical zone of interaction between the Russ's principalities, the Islamic world, and the nomadic powers of Central Asia. Trade routes crisscrossed the region, bringing silk, silver, slaves, and ideas. Cities like Itil and Sarkel stood as outposts of commerce and culture, where sedentary and nomadic worlds met. Despite this vibrant mosaic, no single power had yet united the steppe in a lasting way. The tribes were numerous and often divided. Conflicts over pasture, resources, and prestige were common, but beneath this apparent fragmentation, the groundwork was being laid for something unprecedented, a unification that would come not from within, but from the east. The arrival of the Mongols would change everything. In the early 13th century, a new force emerged from the heart of Mongolia. Led by Temujin, who would become known as Genghis Khan, the Mongols began a series of conquests that would reshape the world. Their mastery of cavalry, communication, and psychological warfare made them nearly unstoppable. They absorbed conquered peoples, respected useful customs, and brought an unprecedented level of military organization to the steppe. When the Mongol tide reached the lands of the Kipchaks and the Rus, the local tribes were unprepared for its speed and cohesion. One by one, the independent polities of the steppe fell or submitted. Those who resisted were crushed. Those who joined were absorbed into a new order. Among the tribes that joined were many future pillars of the Golden Horde. Mongol leaders married into Kipchak families. Turkic soldiers filled the ranks of the imperial army. Administrative techniques were refined and new alliances forged. Thus, before the Golden Horde had a name, its ingredients were already present. The legacy of steppe nomadism, the cultural syncretism of Eurasian trade routes, the military innovations of the Mongols, and the leadership of figures like Jochi, the eldest son of Genghis Khan, whose descendants would soon found a Khanate of their own. The prelude to the Horde is not merely background, it is the deep current that made the empire possible. In the mingling of tribes, the tension of rivalries, and the quiet endurance of the steppe, history waited. The storm was coming, but the wind had long been blowing. As the night deepens, imagine a caravan winding through tall grass under the stars. The distant howl of a wolf, the flicker of a fire at a distant encampment. These are the moments before empire. These are the echoes of the steppe. At the dawn of the 13th century, a man emerged from the Mongolian plateau whose name would become synonymous with conquest, Genghis Khan. Born as Temujin into the fractious world of Mongol tribes, he rose through a life of hardship, exile, and relentless ambition to unite a scattered people. His rise was not inevitable, but his success reshaped the history of the world and laid the foundations for the Golden Horde. Temujin was born around 1162 into a clan of the Borjigin lineage. His early life was marked by betrayal, the death of his father, and the disintegration of his family's influence. Struggling to survive, Temujin learned the importance of loyalty, merit, and strategic alliances. He gradually gained followers, outmaneuvered rivals, and formed key partnerships, most notably with his blood brother Jamuka, who would later become a bitter enemy. In 1206, Temujin succeeded in uniting the Mongol tribes under his leadership and was proclaimed Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. What followed was a military campaign of unprecedented scale. Genghis Khan did not simply conquer, he reorganized society, implemented strict discipline, and established laws known as the Yasa. He built an empire that spanned from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea in less than 2 decades. Central to his power was the mobility of his army. Mongol warriors could travel vast distances with minimal supplies, living off the land, communicating through an efficient relay system, and attacking with speed and precision. Their tactics included feigned retreats, psychological warfare, and strategic use of terrain. Defenders behind city walls were often unprepared for the scale and sophistication of the Mongol onslaught. But Genghis Khan was more than a military genius. He was an organizer. He promoted people based on merit rather than birth. He tolerated and even protected diverse religions. He facilitated trade, established safe passage along the Silk Road, and encouraged communication across continents. Under his rule, a messenger could travel from China to the Caspian with little fear of harm. Among his many children, his eldest son Yochi played a critical role in Western campaigns. Yochi was tasked with expanding Mongol influence into Central Asia and beyond. While questions lingered about his parentage, Genghis Khan recognized Yochi's capabilities and entrusted him with a vast and critical frontier. When Jochi died in 1227, just months before Genghis Khan himself, his domain passed to his sons, most notably Batu. Batu Khan would become the true founder of the Golden Horde. But he did not act alone. He inherited not only land, but a well-oiled imperial machine, a seasoned army, and a legacy of domination that demanded continuation. The Western expansion began in earnest under the joint command of Batu Khan and Subutai, Genghis Khan's most brilliant general. From 1236 to 1242, they led a devastating campaign across the Volga River, into the Rus's principalities, and deep into Eastern Europe. Cities such as Ryazan, Vladimir, and Kyiv fell to their assaults. The Mongols demonstrated their devastating efficiency, sparing few and leaving ruin in their wake. At the Battle of Mohi in 1241, they crushed the Hungarian forces. Panic swept through Europe, as it seemed nothing could stop the Mongol advance. But then, as quickly as they had arrived, they withdrew. The death of Ogedei Khan, Genghis Khan's third son and imperial successor, required the princes to return to Mongolia for the election of a new great Khan. Batu did not forget the West. Instead of abandoning the region, he consolidated control over the lands he had conquered. He established a new capital along the Volga River, Sarai, and governed a dominion that stretched from the Ural Mountains to the Carpathians. This domain became known as the Ulus of Jochi, and later, the Golden Horde. Batu Khan ruled not merely as a warlord, but as a state builder. He allowed local rulers to remain in place if they submitted and paid tribute. He appointed Mongol administrators to oversee taxation and justice. He maintained trade routes, fostered diplomatic relations, and ensured the flow of wealth eastward to the heart of the empire. The creation of the Golden Horde was both a continuation and a transformation of Mongol rule. It retained the military prowess and political authority of the steppe, but began to integrate more deeply with the sedentary societies of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Turkic and Mongol cultures fused. Islam began to take root, even as traditional steppe beliefs persisted. Yet this was only the beginning. As the horde matured, it would face challenges both within and without. But for now, it stood firm, a force forged by war, sustained by diplomacy, and rooted in the enduring spirit of the steppe. As the Golden Horde transitioned from a conquest-driven force to a more stable political entity, it began developing sophisticated systems of administration. Though its origins lay in the fluid and decentralized world of steppe nomadism, the Horde's rulers understood the importance of structured governance to maintain control over their vast and diverse territories. At the top of the political structure was the Khan, considered the ultimate authority by virtue of his descent from Genghis Khan through Yochi. The Khans ruled from Sarai, a city that eventually grew into one of the largest urban centers of medieval Eurasia. Sarai served not only as a political capital, but also as a commercial hub, hosting diplomats, merchants, and emissaries from as far as Venice, Cairo, and Samarkand. The administration of the Golden Horde was deeply influenced by Mongol imperial practices, but it adapted these to local circumstances. The empire was divided into districts or regions, each governed by appointed officials, often drawn from trusted Mongol or Turkic elites. These officials collected tribute, maintained order, and ensured the enforcement of the Khan's decrees. One of the most distinctive aspects of the Horde's rule was the use of the Yarlik system, official charters or patents granted by the Khan. These documents conferred rights, privileges, and responsibilities on a wide range of figures, from Russian princes to church leaders and foreign merchants. A Yarlik might exempt a monastery from taxes or confirm a prince's right to rule over a specific region. This system was a powerful tool of soft control, allowing the Horde to exert influence without direct occupation. Taxation was central to the Horde's administration. Rather than exploiting the land directly, the Mongols relied on tribute and taxes collected by local intermediaries. In the Ruslands, this often meant native princes were tasked with gathering dues from their subjects and passing them on to the Horde. In return, they were allowed to retain their titles and autonomy. Tax farmers, known as baskaks in the early period, were sometimes used to oversee the process directly, but over time, reliance shifted more heavily toward local rulers. To facilitate governance, the Horde maintained a postal and intelligence network modeled after the earlier Mongol yam system. Relay stations spaced across major routes provided fresh horses and supplies for messengers, allowing rapid communication across vast distances. This network also served intelligence and military purposes, keeping the Khan informed of developments in distant provinces. Law and order were maintained through a combination of traditional Mongol legal codes and local customs. The Yasa, the semi-mythical code attributed to Genghis Khan, was upheld in spirit if not always in specific form. It emphasized loyalty, discipline, and collective responsibility. Offenses such as theft, betrayal, and insubordination were harshly punished, while personal merit and service were rewarded. In practice, local legal traditions were often respected, especially in sedentary areas, allowing for a degree of legal pluralism. Military service remained a cornerstone of the Horde's political structure. The nobility was expected to provide troops during campaigns, and military obligations were often tied to land tenure or status. The Mongol system of decimal organization, dividing forces into units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, remained in use. Military leaders held significant authority and were often key figures in regional governance. Religious policy within the Horde was pragmatic and tolerant. The early Khans, including Batu and his immediate successors, followed traditional Mongol shamanistic beliefs. However, as Turkic and Islamic influences deepened, Islam began to gain prominence among the elite, culminating in the conversion of Khan Burka in the mid-13th century. Despite this shift, the Horde maintained policies of religious tolerance, granting protections to Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and others. This inclusivity contributed to relative internal stability and allowed the Horde to benefit from the loyalty and services of diverse communities. The administrative genius of the Golden Horde lay in its ability to combine Mongol imperial norms with local institutions. It neither imposed a single model of governance nor allowed complete autonomy. Instead, it created a hybrid system that balanced control and flexibility, a model well suited to a realm that stretched across thousands of miles and encompassed nomadic tribes, urban centers, forests, rivers, and trade routes. By the late 13th century, this system had enabled the Golden Horde to become one of the most powerful and wealthy entities in Eurasia. Its political structure was not without weaknesses, but for a time, it succeeded in holding together a diverse and expansive empire through a mix of fear, diplomacy, and accommodation. As the night deepens and the fire crackles low, think of the scrolls being written in Sarai, the riders galloping between distant outposts, and the quiet calculations of a prince weighing loyalty against ambition. This was the machinery of empire, not forged in gold or stone, but in compromise, communication, and the ever-present authority of the Khan. In the mosaic of cultures and peoples that made up the Golden Horde, religion played a pivotal but often understated role. Unlike many empires that sought to impose a single faith, the Horde initially embraced a policy of religious tolerance, which evolved over time as Islam rose to prominence. This chapter explores the spiritual landscape of the Golden Horde, its transformations, its politics, and its enduring legacies. In its early years, the Golden Horde reflected the animistic and shamanistic traditions of the Mongol world. These beliefs centered on the worship of Tengri, the sky god, and reverence for ancestral spirits. Shamans acted as mediators between the spiritual and physical worlds, guiding communities with rituals, healing, and divination. This spiritual framework provided a sense of cosmic order and legitimacy to the rule of the Khans, who were often viewed as divinely chosen. However, as the Horde expanded and incorporated more Turkic and sedentary populations, it encountered a wide array of religious traditions. Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Buddhism all coexisted within the Horde's territories. Rather than suppressing these faiths, the Khans adopted a pragmatic approach, granting autonomy and protection to religious communities in exchange for loyalty and tribute. One of the most significant religious shifts in the Horde's history occurred under the rule of Batu Khan, who reigned from the 1250s to the 1260s. A grandson of Genghis Khan and brother to Batu, Burka was the first Mongol ruler to convert to Islam. His conversion marked a turning point. Not only did it align the Horde more closely with the Islamic world, but it also introduced new cultural, legal, and administrative influences. Burka's embrace of Islam was genuine, but it was also politically astute. By adopting the faith of many of his Turkic subjects and neighboring Muslim powers, he strengthened internal unity and secured valuable alliances. Notably, Burke supported the Mamluks of Egypt in their struggle against the Ilkhanate, a rival Mongol Khanate in Persia that remained largely non-Muslim at the time. This conflict, known as the Burka-Hulagu War, was one of the earliest instances of Mongol-on-Mongol warfare and highlighted as Islam spread, it gradually became the dominant faith among the ruling elite. Mosques were built in cities like Sarai and Bulgar. Islamic scholars and judges, qadis, were appointed to administer Sharia law in conjunction with traditional Mongol codes. Arabic and Persian became languages of administration and scholarship, complementing the use of Turkic and Mongolic dialects. Despite this growing Islamic identity, The Horde continued to tolerate other religions. The Russian Orthodox Church, for example, enjoyed a privileged status. Khans granted it tax exemptions and yarliks guaranteeing its protection. This helped the church consolidate power within the Russ's lands and contributed to its long-term survival and influence. Similarly, Jewish communities in Crimea and Christian Armenians and Georgians were allowed to practice their faiths with relative freedom. This atmosphere of tolerance did not mean complete harmony. At times, religious tensions flared, especially when policies or local officials deviated from the Khan's overarching directives. Yet overall, the Golden Horde maintained a balance that allowed multiple faiths to flourish under its rule. This pluralism was not rooted in ideology, but in the steppe tradition of pragmatic governance. The Khan's court often reflected this diversity. Visitors to Sarai described a cosmopolitan setting where imams, priests, rabbis, and shamans might be found in the same marketplace, or even debating theological matters in courtly settings. The city was not just a center of power, but a place where cultures intersected and ideas were exchanged. Conversion to Islam among the general population was a gradual process. Among Turkic tribes and urban dwellers, Islam spread through trade, intermarriage, and the influence of Sufi missionaries. The Sufis, known for their mystical approach and inclusive practices, were particularly effective in bringing Islam to new communities. By the late 14th century, Islam had become deeply entrenched in the political and cultural fabric of the Horde. This transformation had long-term consequences. It helped shape the identity of successor states such as the Kazan, Crimean, and Astrakhan Khanates, all of which embraced Islam as their state religion. It also influenced the development of Islamic civilization in the Volga and steppe regions, leaving a legacy that endures in parts of Russia and Central Asia to this day. Religion in the Golden Horde was never monolithic. It was fluid, adaptive, and deeply intertwined with politics and society. From the blue sky of Tengri to the crescent of Islam, the spiritual journey of the Horde mirrored its broader evolution, from a nomadic force of conquest to a complex multicultural empire. As your thoughts wander now, picture a twilight scene in Sarai, a muezzin calling the faithful to prayer, a shaman chanting beneath the stars, a monk copying texts by candlelight. In this world of contrasts, the Horde found not contradiction, but coexistence. The Golden Horde, though often remembered for its military prowess and political dominance, was also a central player in the economy of medieval Eurasia. Its vast territory encompassed key segments of trade networks that connected east and west, north and south. Through its cities, rivers, and roads, the Horde became a vital artery in the circulatory system of global commerce during the 13th and 14th centuries. At the heart of the Golden Horde's economic power was its strategic position, spanning from the Carpathians in the west to the borders of Central Asia in the east, and from the forested lands of the Rus to the shores of the Caspian and Black Seas. The Horde commanded access to numerous trade routes. Most significantly, it controlled major portions of the Silk Road, the ancient network that linked China with the Middle East and Europe. The Mongol Empire as a whole contributed to what historians call the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace and stability across much of Eurasia under Mongol rule. This facilitated unprecedented levels of trade, communication, and cultural exchange. Caravans traveled safely from Beijing to Baghdad. Merchants exchanged goods in Sarai, and silver from Europe paid for silk from the east. Sarai, the capital of the Golden Horde, was not just a political center, but a thriving commercial metropolis. Archaeological excavations reveal markets, workshops, caravanserais, and residential quarters indicating a complex urban economy. Goods from China, India, Persia, Byzantium, and Europe could be found in its markets. Horses, furs, textiles, ceramics, spices, and precious metals changed hands daily, enriching the city and its rulers. Other cities, such as Bulgar, Astrakhan, and Solkat in Crimea, also flourished under Horde rule. These cities acted as nodes in the wider trade network, serving as stops for caravans, centers of artisanal production, and hubs of taxation. Ports on the Black Sea allowed for maritime trade with Italian city-states like Genoa and Venice, whose merchants established colonies and trading posts in Crimean cities with the blessing of the Khans. Taxation was a primary source of revenue for the Horde. Rather than engaging directly in trade, the Khans and their administrators levied duties on merchants, taxed market transactions, and imposed tribute on subject peoples. This system enabled the Horde to reap economic benefits without disrupting commercial activity. Tax exemptions granted to certain cities or religious institutions through yarliks further encouraged economic development and loyalty. The Volga River, one of the great waterways of Eurasia, played a central role in the Horde's economy. It served as a natural highway connecting the northern forests with the southern steppe and beyond. Riverine trade allowed for the transportation of bulky goods, such as grain and timber, and supported a thriving fishing and shipping industry. The Kama and Don rivers provided additional arteries of commerce. The Horde also benefited from the slave trade, a grim but lucrative component of medieval economies. Captives taken in wars or raids were often sold to buyers in the Middle East, Central Asia, or Mediterranean markets. Slave markets operated in cities like Azov and Kaffa, and while the practice was brutal, it was economically significant and linked the Horde to a broader system of supply and demand. Agriculture, while less prominent in the steppe heartland, played a vital role in the more fertile border regions. Along the Volga and in parts of the Russ's territories, grain production, animal husbandry, and horticulture supported both urban centers and military garrisons. The blending of nomadic and sedentary lifestyles led to innovations in agricultural practices, irrigation, and land management. Artisans and craftsmen contributed to the economy through the production of goods, ranging from pottery and textiles to weapons and jewelry. Many of these items were produced locally using techniques borrowed from Persian, Turkic, and Chinese traditions. The movement of skilled laborers, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes forcibly relocated by Mongol rulers, helped disseminate technological and artistic knowledge across the empire. Coinage under the Golden Horde further illustrates the integration of economic systems. The Khans minted silver and copper coins in multiple cities, often bearing Arabic inscriptions and Islamic motifs. These coins circulated widely, not just within the Horde's territory, but across the Islamic world, and even into parts of Europe. Their uniformity and reliability promoted trust and facilitated trade. Despite the wealth it generated, the economy of the Golden Horde was not without vulnerabilities. Over-reliance on taxation, fluctuations in trade volume, climate changes affecting agricultural output, and political instability could all disrupt the delicate balance. Nonetheless, for much of its existence, the Horde succeeded in creating an economic environment that supported growth, stability, and interregional connectivity. As you let your thoughts wander, imagine the clatter of carts on a dusty road, the sound of haggling in a crowded bazaar, the scent of spices mingling with smoke from a blacksmith's forge. Picture caravans arriving from distant lands, bearing silk, gems, and stories. This was the Golden Horde, not just a realm of conquest, but a land alive with commerce. Beyond the military campaigns and the bustling markets of Sarai, the Golden Horde was home to millions of ordinary people, nomads and townspeople, artisans and shepherds, scribes and soldiers. Their lives, though often overlooked in chronicles of war and politics, formed the bedrock of the Horde society. This chapter explores the everyday world of those who lived under the rule of the Khans, offering a glimpse into their homes, habits, and hopes. Life in the steppe was shaped by geography. In the open grasslands, nomadic pastoralism remained the dominant way of life. Clans and tribes moved with the seasons, driving their herds of horses, sheep, goats, and cattle in search of fresh pasture. Mobility was essential, not only for feeding livestock, but for avoiding harsh weather and maintaining social networks. The typical dwelling of these nomads was the yurt, a portable circular tent made of wooden frames and felt. Designed for both insulation and ventilation, yurts could be assembled or dismantled within hours. They were well suited to the needs of families constantly on the move, and their interior layout reflected cultural values. The hearth at the center, the place of honor to the north, and storage areas arranged according to gender roles and social customs. Nomadic life required a deep knowledge of the environment. Herding was more than a livelihood. It was a science and a tradition. Men tended the flocks and trained horses, while women managed the household, raised children, and produced goods such as textiles and dairy products. Children learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and stories, songs, and proverbs served as both entertainment and education. In contrast to the roaming pastoralists, the urban centers of the Golden Horde offered a more sedentary lifestyle. Cities like Sarai, Bolgar, and Astrakhan housed a mix of ethnic and religious communities: Turkic Muslims, Mongols, Slavs, Armenians, Jews, and others. These cities featured mosques, markets, workshops, bathhouses, and schools. Some neighborhoods were organized by profession or religion, fostering both cooperation and competition among residents. Craftsmanship was a key feature of urban life. Artisans worked in metal, leather, wood, and clay, producing tools, weapons, ornaments, and household items. Textile production, including silk weaving and felt making, was widespread. Many of these products were sold locally, but others traveled great distances along trade routes. Guilds or informal associations often helped regulate standards and protect economic interests. The diet of the people reflected both their environment and their cultural interactions. Nomads relied on meat, milk, and fermented dairy products, such as kumis, fermented mare's milk. In cities and agricultural zones, bread, grains, fruits, and vegetables were more common. Trade introduced spices, dried fruits, and sweets from distant lands, enriching the culinary repertoire. Clothing was practical but also a marker of status and identity. Nomads wore tunics, trousers, boots, and fur-lined coats suited for riding in cold weather. Urban dwellers often adopted more elaborate styles, with silk robes and embroidered garments indicating wealth. Jewelry, often made from silver or gold, was common among women, and belts, hats, and boots were customized for both function and display. Education varied depending on location and background. In Islamic communities, boys were often taught to read and recite the Quran, and some advanced to study law, mathematics, or astronomy. In Christian areas, church schools preserved religious texts and taught basic literacy. Oral tradition remained vital everywhere, preserving epics, genealogies, and moral lessons. Entertainment and social gatherings were woven into daily life. Music played on stringed instruments or flutes accompanied feasts, weddings, and storytelling. Falconry, wrestling, and horse races provided both sport and spectacle. Festivals, whether religious or seasonal, brought communities together in celebration and reflection. The family was the cornerstone of social structure. Kinship ties influenced marriage, inheritance, and alliances. While polygamy was practiced, especially among elites, the extended family provided a network of support. Women, while often confined to domestic roles, could wield significant influence in both family and clan affairs. Religion shaped daily rhythms, but also coexisted with older beliefs and practices. Pilgrimage, prayer, fasting, and rituals were observed across faiths. Shrines and cemeteries dotted the landscape, offering places for reflection and remembrance. Religious leaders were respected figures, offering guidance, adjudication, and spiritual comfort. Despite their differences, rural and urban communities were interconnected. Nomads supplied meat, wool, and horses. City dwellers offered tools, fabrics, and manufactured goods. Seasonal markets and festivals allowed for exchange, negotiation, and cultural blending. Roads, rivers, and trade routes ensured that even remote settlements remained part of the broader world. As the fire dims and the winds rustle across the plains, imagine a family gathered in a yurt, sharing stories under the stars. Picture the crowded streets of Sarai, alive with voices and colors. These were the lives that sustained the Golden Horde, simple, complex, and always in motion. Among the many relationships the Golden Horde maintained, few were as complex and consequential as its connection with the Russ's principalities. Stretching across the forests and river valleys to the northwest of the Horde's steppe heartland, the Rus lands were home to a patchwork of Slavic states, divided, competitive, and vulnerable when the Mongols arrived. Over time, this relationship evolved from one of conquest to a unique system of indirect rule that would shape both parties for centuries. The Mongol invasion of Russes began in earnest in the late 1230s. Led by Batu Khan and the general Subutai, the Mongol forces swept through the region with devastating effect. Cities such as Ryazan, Vladimir, and Kyiv were besieged and sacked, with large parts of their populations killed or enslaved. The campaign culminated in the defeat of the Russ's coalition at the Battle of the Kalka River, a traumatic moment that underscored the military superiority of the Mongols. Despite the destruction, the Mongols did not annex the Russ's territories in a traditional sense. Instead, they incorporated them into their empire through a system of tribute and vassalage. The Russ's princes were allowed to maintain their positions, provided they acknowledged the authority of the Khan and paid regular tribute. This arrangement was both efficient and effective. It gave the Horde access to wealth and manpower, without the need for direct administration. Central to this system was the institution of the Yarlik, a charter issued by the Khan that confirmed a prince's right to rule. Possession of a Yarlik was a symbol of legitimacy, and over time, rival princes began competing for the favor of the Horde's rulers. The Grand Prince of Vladimir, for instance, held a privileged position thanks to his Yarlik, which allowed him to collect tribute from other Rus lands on behalf of the Khan. The Horde also maintained oversight through envoys, tax collectors, and occasional military interventions. While early on, officials known as Baskaks were installed in Russ's towns to oversee tribute collection, this system was gradually replaced by one in which the Russ's princes themselves assumed the responsibility, effectively becoming tax farmers for the Horde. This allowed for greater local autonomy, while ensuring a steady flow of revenue to Sarai. Religious institutions, particularly the Orthodox Church, played a key role in this relationship. The Horde granted the Church tax exemptions and protection, recognizing its authority over the faithful. In return, the Church provided moral legitimacy to the princes who cooperated with the Mongols. Some historians argue that this period laid the groundwork for the later alliance between church and state in Muscovite Russia. Life under the Horde was difficult, especially in the immediate aftermath of the invasions. Tributes were heavy, and periodic raids reminded the Rus of their subordination. Yet over time, many Russ's cities recovered and even prospered under the relative stability provided by the Pax Mongolica. trade routes were restored, merchants traveled safely, and cultural exchange increased. The influence of the Golden Horde on the Rus was profound. Administrative practices, military organization, and even diplomatic customs were borrowed or adapted. The concept of autocratic rule, centralized taxation, and the use of official seals and charters all bear traces of Mongol influence. Some of the terminology and titles used in Muscovite Russia have Turkic or Mongol origins. Perhaps most significantly, the Horde played a role in the rise of Moscow. Initially a minor principality, Moscow's rulers proved especially adept at courting favor with the Khans. They secured the Yarlik for the Grand Prince of Vladimir multiple times and were entrusted with collecting tribute from across the region. This gave them wealth, prestige, and political leverage over their rivals. By the late 14th century, tensions between the Horde and the Rus began to increase. The weakening of central authority in Sarai, combined with growing assertiveness among the Rus's princes, led to open conflict. In 1380, the Battle of Kulikovo saw a coalition of Rus's forces, led by Prince Dmitry Donskoy, confront and defeat a Mongol army under Mamai. Though the victory was largely symbolic, full independence would not come for another century. It marked a turning point in Rus's resistance. The final break came in the late 15th century, when even the Third of Moscow refused to pay tribute to the Horde. This act of defiance, combined with the collapse of central power in the Horde itself, effectively ended Mongol suzerainty over Russia. The Tatar yoke, as it came to be known in Russian chronicles, was lifted, but its legacy endured. In architecture, administration, military organization, and political ideology, the shadow of the Horde remained. The centralized state that emerged in Muscovy bore many marks of its former overlords, and the memory of domination, filtered through centuries of narrative, would shape Russian identity for generations. As night falls on the forest and steppe, imagine a prince kneeling in Sarai, receiving his Yarlik with bowed head. Picture the long road north, where tribute caravans move silently beneath the stars. In this delicate balance of power, submission, and ambition, the Horde and the Rus wove a shared and complicated history. As with many empires, the Golden Horde's zenith was followed by a long and uneven decline. Though its foundations were strong, the pressures of internal strife, external threats, and shifting trade patterns gradually eroded the unity and authority that had once made it a dominant power in Eurasia. This chapter traces the challenges that confronted the Horde and the eventual fragmentation of its vast domain. The first signs of trouble emerged in the mid-14th century. The succession of Khans became increasingly contested, with rival branches of the royal family vying for control. These disputes weakened central authority and often led to civil wars. The throne in Sarai changed hands frequently, sometimes with outside intervention, and the political coherence that had once held the empire together began to fracture. Compounding these political struggles was the outbreak of the Black Death. In the 1340s, the plague swept across Eurasia, devastating cities and countryside alike. Sarai, once a bustling metropolis, saw its population and trade activity plummet. Entire communities disappeared, and the disruption of trade routes further strained the economy. The demographic collapse undercut the tax base and reduced the manpower available for both governance and defense. As the Horde's grip weakened, regional leaders grew bolder. In the Rus lands, the Grand Duchy of Moscow continued to expand its influence, steadily consolidating power. Its rulers, once faithful tribute collectors for the Khan, began asserting greater independence. In 1380, at the Battle of Kulikovo, Prince Dmitry Donskoy's forces defeated the army of Mamai, a powerful warlord of the Western Horde. Though not a final victory, the battle became a symbol of resistance and a harbinger of change. In the east, the Central Asian conqueror Timur, also known as Tamerlane, emerged as a significant threat. In the late 14th century, Timur embarked on campaigns that destabilized much of the Islamic world. He viewed the Golden Horde as both a rival and a target. In 1395, Timur invaded the Horde's territory and sacked Sarai, dealing a crippling blow to its infrastructure and prestige. The capital was burned, trade routes were disrupted, and the authority of the Khan was shattered. Following Timur's invasion, the Horde struggled to recover. While new Khans attempted to rebuild, the damage was deep. Competing power centers emerged, and the unity of the realm fractured. Several semi-independent Khanates arose from the ruins, including the Crimean Khanate, the Kazan Khanate, and the Astrakhan Khanate. These states maintained Mongol traditions and claimed descent from Genghis Khan, but they operated independently and often in conflict with one another. At the same time, external pressures increased. The Lithuanians and Poles pushed eastward, clashing with Horde forces and expanding into former territories. The Ottomans, rising in the south, began to assert influence in the Black Sea region, forging alliances with or against various Khanates as suited their interests. The once central position of the Golden Horde became a geopolitical crossroads, with many powers vying for influence. Economic shifts also played a role in the decline. As maritime trade routes gained prominence, the overland Silk Road lost some of its importance. The Italian merchants who had once filled the markets of Kaffa and Sarai turned increasingly to the Mediterranean and Atlantic worlds. The flow of silver, silk, and spices changed course, and the Horde's role as a commercial bridge began to wane. Internally, the absence of strong central leadership led to lawlessness in some regions. Raiding increased, both by external enemies and rogue warbands. Peasants and merchants suffered from instability, and many cities never fully recovered from the destruction wrought by plague and war. The famed Pax Mongolica had faded, replaced by uncertainty and fragmentation. Yet even in decline, the legacy of the Horde persisted. The successor Khanates continued to shape regional politics, and the memory of Mongol dominance lingered in the political cultures of Russia, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. The idea of centralized autocratic rule, the use of charters and official seals, and the military strategies employed by emerging powers all bore traces of the Horde's influence. By the early 16th century, the Golden Horde, as a unified entity, no longer existed. Its remnants had been absorbed or replaced by rising powers. The Grand Duchy of Moscow emerged as the most prominent successor in the north, while the Crimean Khanate became an Ottoman vassal and a dominant force in the Black Sea. The fall of the Golden Horde was not a single event, but a process, a gradual unraveling shaped by plague, war, ambition, and the relentless tide of history. It had ruled for nearly 3 centuries, leaving a profound imprint on the lands and peoples it touched. As your eyes grow heavy and the past settles around you, imagine the once great halls of Sarai, now silent beneath the moonlight. Picture the banners of rival Khans fluttering in the steppe winds. In this quiet dissolution, the echoes of empire still linger. As the central authority of the Golden Horde weakened, the vast steppe that had once been united under a single Khan fractured into a constellation of successor states. These entities, while claiming lineage from Genghis Khan and maintaining many elements of Mongol political and military tradition, were no longer united. This chapter explores the rise of these successor states, their unique paths, and the complex legacies they carried forward. The most prominent of the successor states were the Crimean Khanate, the Kazan Khanate, the Astrakhan Khanate, and the Nogai Horde. Each emerged from different regions of the former Golden Horde and developed its own identity and strategic priorities. While they sometimes cooperated, they more often competed, both with one another and with external powers such as Muscovy, the Ottoman Empire, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Crimean Khanate arose in the 1440s in the southern part of the former Horde territory. Its leaders were from the Giray dynasty, which claimed direct descent from Genghis Khan through Yochi. The Crimean Khans established their capital at Sarai and quickly formed a strong alliance with the Ottoman Empire. As Ottoman vassals, they gained military and economic support, which they used to dominate the Black Sea region. One of the main sources of wealth for the Crimean Khanate was the slave trade. Raiding expeditions, particularly into the Russes and Polish-Lithuanian borderlands, captured thousands of people each year who were then sold in markets such as Kefe, Kaffa. These raids, while economically beneficial to the Khanate, created long-lasting enmity and shaped the defensive strategies of neighboring states for generations. To the north, the Kazan Khanate took shape around the city of Kazan, formerly a key administrative center of the Golden Horde. Its population was largely made up of Turkic-speaking Muslims, many of whom were Volga Bulgars, assimilated into Mongol society. The Kazan Khans maintained an independent foreign policy and developed a flourishing cultural scene with advances in architecture, literature, and religious scholarship. Kazan's position along the Volga made it both a strategic prize and a constant target for the expanding Muscovite state. Over the course of the 15th and early 16th centuries, relations between Kazan and Moscow oscillated between trade and war. Ultimately, Ivan the Terrible launched a full-scale invasion and captured Kazan in 1552, bringing an end to its independence and marking a significant step in Russia's transformation into a multi-ethnic empire. Further down the Volga, the Astrakhan Khanate emerged as another fragment of the former Horde. Like Kazan, Astrakhan was a center of trade and Islamic culture. Its control over the lower Volga made it a vital link in north-south commerce. However, its proximity to both Muscovy and the Caspian Sea exposed it to constant pressure. In 1556, just 4 years after the fall of Kazan, Astrakhan too was annexed by Russia. The Nogai Horde, less centralized than the others, developed along the steppe frontier east of the Volga. Named after Nogai, a powerful general and statesman of the late Golden Horde, this confederation of tribes retained a nomadic lifestyle and often served as allies, mercenaries, or enemies of neighboring states depending on shifting political winds. The Nogais played an important role in steppe politics well into the 17th century, though their power gradually declined due to internal divisions and extern. These successor states continued many traditions of the Golden Horde: the use of the Mongol language in official documents, the reverence for Genghisid ancestry, and the structure of steppe diplomacy all endured. At the same time, they adapted to new realities. Islam became more firmly entrenched, administrative systems were localized, and alliances were forged with emerging powers like the Ottomans and the Russians. The fragmentation of the Horde also influenced the geopolitics of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. The balance of power shifted and new political entities emerged to fill the void. Muscovy, benefiting from its prior experience under Mongol rule, adapted many administrative techniques and military strategies to suit its expanding ambitions. In a sense, the fall of the Horde paved the way for the rise of the Russian Empire. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, the legacy of the Golden Horde informed cultural and political developments. The Khanates participated in the broader network of Islamic scholarship, trade, and diplomacy. Mosques, madrasas, and Sufi lodges flourished in cities once ruled by Mongol generals. The integration of Mongol and Islamic traditions produced unique forms of art, architecture, and governance. Though they no longer wielded the power of the original Horde, The successor states preserved and transmitted many of its ideas. Their stories were complex, marked by resilience, ambition, and adaptation. Some would endure for centuries, others would fall quickly, but all carried fragments of a shattered empire. As the campfires dim across the steppe, imagine the banners of the Khanates fluttering in the dusk, the black standard of Kazan, the white horse of Crimea, the crescent of Astrakhan. These were the twilight flames of an empire once mighty, now scattered, but not forgotten. Long after the disintegration of the Golden Horde, its legacy continued to shape the political, cultural, and social landscapes of Eurasia. Though the empire itself ceased to exist as a unified state, its influence resonated in the practices of successor states, the ideologies of emerging powers, and the memories preserved in both oral and written traditions. This chapter explores how the Horde's presence echoed through history, leaving an indelible mark across continents. One of the most profound areas of influence was political. The Golden Horde established a model of centralized authority tempered by pragmatic delegation. Its system of yarliks, or charters of legitimacy, was emulated by successor states and even absorbed by the Muscovite princes. The concept of strong, charismatic leadership, legitimized through lineage, especially descent from Genghis Khan, persisted in Central Asia for centuries. Even in Russia, the idea of a divinely ordained autocratic ruler bore a fame. The administrative systems of the Horde, combining tribute collection, military service, and local autonomy, provided a template for governance in regions far beyond the steppe. The Russian czars adopted Mongol methods of tax collection, census taking, and territorial management. In the Volga region and the Caucasus, local elites continued to operate within frameworks first established under Mongol rule. In military terms, the Horde left a legacy of mobility, discipline, and adaptability. Its use of mounted archers, decentralized command structures, and rapid communication networks inspired both awe and imitation. Later, Eurasian armies, whether in Russia, the Ottoman Empire, or the Safavid state, borrowed tactics and technologies that had been refined in the campaigns of the Golden Horde. Culturally, the Horde was a conduit through which knowledge and traditions traveled across vast distances. It played a key role in the transmission of ideas between East and West. Islamic scholarship from Persia and Central Asia reached Eastern Europe, while technologies such as papermaking, printing, and gunpowder found their way westward. The Horde's cities were melting pots of language, religion, and craft, creating hybrid cultures that enriched the broader world. The spread of Islam in the Volga-Ural region and the steppe was closely tied to the legacy of the Horde. While Islam had entered these areas earlier, it was under the rule of the Golden Horde and its successor states that the religion became firmly rooted. Mosques, madrasas, and Sufi orders continued to flourish long after the empire's fall. To this day, regions like Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, and Crimea retain vibrant Islamic traditions shaped in part by their Mongol past. Art and architecture also reflected the syncretism fostered by the Horde. The fusion of Turkic, Persian, Mongol, and Slavic elements produced unique forms of artistic expression. Ceramics, textiles, metalwork, and manuscript illumination all bore signs of cross-cultural exchange. Architectural styles, particularly in mosque design and city planning, showed the influence of both steppe minimalism and Islamic aesthetics. Language, too, bore the imprint of the Horde. Many Turkic languages absorbed Mongol vocabulary and vice versa. In Russia, numerous administrative and military terms have Mongol or Turkic origins. The very structure of Russian political vocabulary, terms for power, service, and sovereignty, reflects centuries of contact with the Horde and its successors. Even in historical memory, the Golden Horde occupies a paradoxical space. In Russian chronicles, it was long vilified as the Tatar yoke, a period of foreign domination and suffering. Yet modern historians have revised this view, recognizing the Horde as a complex polity that brought stability, facilitated trade, and allowed for cultural flourishing under certain conditions. In Central Asia, the Horde is often remembered with greater nuance or even pride, as part of a broader nomadic heritage. In Tatar, Bashkir, and Kazakh identity, the legacy of the Golden Horde is still invoked today. Statues, museums, and academic institutions commemorate its history. Political and cultural revival movements seek to reconnect with the traditions and structures that once unified the steppe. The idea of a shared nomadic past remains a powerful symbol of unity and resilience. Internationally, the Horde's legacy is also evident in global history. It served as a crucial intermediary in the exchange of goods and knowledge between Europe and Asia. Without the relative stability and infrastructural investment of the Mongol and post-Mongol polities, the late medieval and early Renaissance worlds may have evolved very differently. The Golden Horde's legacy is not confined to ruins or relics. It lives on in the languages people speak, the faiths they follow, the borders they contest, and the systems by which they govern. It reminds us that empire is not merely a political phenomenon, but a cultural and historical force that shapes identities long after its banners have fallen. As the wind blows across the empty steppe, the traces of camps and cities may fade, but the echoes remain. In memory and myth, in language and law, the Golden Horde endures, not as a vanished empire, but as a living thread woven through the tapestry of Eurasian history. As the chapters of history turn, few empires leave behind a legacy as paradoxical as that of the Golden Horde. Its rulers once controlled a vast realm, stretched across thousands of kilometers, governed with a blend of fear and tolerance, war and diplomacy. Yet, unlike Rome or Persia, the Golden Horde left few enduring monuments of stone. Its legacy is instead etched into institutions, cultures, and the subtle rhythms of life across Eurasia. In this penultimate chapter, we reflect on how memory of the historical narratives about the Golden Horde have often depended on perspective. In the lands of the Rus, the centuries under Mongol domination were long described as the Tatar yoke, a period of humiliation, taxation, and suppression. Chronicles portrayed the Khans as foreign overlords, demanding tribute and crushing rebellion. This view, forged in the fires of rising Muscovite nationalism, became central to the story Russia told itself about its path to sovereignty. Yet this narrative has increasingly come under scrutiny. Modern historians recognize that the relationship between the Horde and the Rus was more nuanced. The Horde granted autonomy to local rulers, protected the Orthodox Church, and fostered commercial growth. Its influence on Russian political culture, military organization, and administrative practice was profound and lasting. The yoke, while oppressive in moments, also provided stability and integration into broader Eurasian systems. In Central Asia and among the descendants of the Turkic Mongol peoples, the legacy of the Golden Horde is often viewed in a more positive light. The empire is remembered not just for conquest, but for statecraft, trade, religious tolerance, and cultural blending. For Tatars, Bashkirs, Kazakhs, and other groups, the Horde represents a formative period in the development of their historical and ethnic identities. Statues of Genghis Khan and Batu Khan stand not as symbols of domination, but of strength, and the Golden Horde's memory also survives in folklore and oral tradition. In the steppe, stories of powerful Khans, just judges, and legendary battles are still told by elders and recorded by scholars. These tales are not always historically accurate, but they reflect the cultural importance of the Horde as a source of identity and continuity. They speak to a time when nomads ruled empires, when diplomacy rode on horseback, and when cities could rise and fall in a generation. Museums and academic institutions across Eurasia are increasingly revisiting the Horde's legacy with fresh eyes. Exhibitions highlight its contributions to trade, governance, and interfaith relations. Scholars explore its role in shaping medieval geopolitics and connecting the Islamic world with Eastern Europe. This academic reassessment helps dismantle simplistic or ethnocentric interpretations, revealing a more complex and fascinating picture. In literature and media, the Golden Horde occasionally surfaces as a subject of renewed interest. Historical novels, documentaries, and even video games have begun to explore the lives of its khans and the peoples who lived under their rule. These portrayals vary in quality and accuracy, but they signal a growing public curiosity about a world once considered peripheral to mainstream history. There is also an ongoing effort among various ethnic and national communities to reclaim and reinterpret the Horde's legacy. In Crimea, Tatar groups invoke the memory of the Crimean Khanate to assert their cultural heritage. In Tatarstan, Kazan's past as a Khanate capital is celebrated in festivals, monuments, and public discourse. These acts of remembrance are not mere nostalgia. They are statements of identity and belonging in the modern age. Of course, memory is not without politics. In some countries, the Horde is used as a tool of nationalist mythology, while in others, it is downplayed or vilified. The legacy of conquest is never neutral, but it is telling that the Golden Horde remains a subject of debate, commemoration, and reinterpretation more than 6 centuries after its decline. Its influence endures in subtle ways, in the layout of cities, in the echoes of language, in the ceremonies of governance. Even the idea of empire, of ruling over diverse peoples through a blend of force and diplomacy, owes something to the Mongol model. The Golden Horde, often seen as a relic of the past, is in fact a participant in the present. As twilight settles over the plains, one can almost hear the distant rumble of hooves, the whisper of silk banners in the wind, the voices of merchants, scholars, and soldiers speaking a dozen tongues. In that whisper, the memory of the Golden Horde lives on, not only in books and buildings, but in the minds and identities of those shaped by its shadow. As our journey through the world of the Golden Horde draws to a close, we pause to reflect, not just on dates and events, but on the deeper currents of history that ripple through time. The story of the Horde is one of motion and memory, of peoples and powers converging across the great Eurasian steppe. It is a story not just of rise and fall, but of transformation, endurance, and legacy. The Golden Horde emerged from the embers of conquest, born from the campaigns of Genghis Khan, and forged by the ambitions of his son Yochi and grandson Batu. It was a state unlike many others of its time, nomadic in origin yet increasingly settled, brutal in battle, yet often tolerant in governance. Its rulers did not simply conquer, they administered, traded, negotiated, and adapted. Through its reign, the Horde connected distant lands, from the shores of the Black Sea to the forests of Siberia, from the Rus principalities to the oases of Central Asia. Its influence traveled along roads and rivers, in caravans and correspondence, through markets, alliances, and silent tribute. Caravans that journeyed beneath the stars. We have seen how the Horde ruled, with a mix of fear and diplomacy, hierarchy and flexibility. Its cities, Sarai, Bolgar, Astrakhan, were vibrant centers of life, where languages mingled and faiths coexisted. Its military might was matched by its cultural reach. its steppe traditions by administrative innovations. The Horde absorbed and was absorbed by the lands it ruled, leaving marks that would outlast its banners. The decline of the Horde, though slow and uneven, was not the end of its story. Successor Khanades rose in Crimea, Kazan, and Astrakhan. Russia, shaped in part by its relationship with the Horde, began its transformation into a centralized empire. The memory of the Mongol era became a contested legacy, reviled by some, reclaimed by others, but never forgotten. Even today, echoes of the Golden Horde resonate. They are present in the languages spoken, in the political structures inherited, in the religious landscapes formed, and in the identities claimed. Museums, manuscripts, monuments, all tell parts of its story. But perhaps the truest memory lies in the unbroken thread of adaptation and resilience that has defined the peoples of the steppe for millennia. What does the legacy of the Golden Horde teach us? It reminds us that empires are not static. They are living systems, shaped by those who build, serve, and resist them. It shows that cultural exchange can emerge even from conquest, that diversity and unity can coexist, and that memory is a powerful force in shaping the future. As the stars wheel overhead and the steppe breathes beneath a quiet night, imagine the horizon once again alive with the movement of riders, the flicker of firelight in a distant yurt, the murmur of stories passed from elder to child. These are not simply images of the past. They are the closing lines of a history that never truly ends. Let the echoes of the Horde travel with you, not as a tale of long-ago rulers, but as a reminder of the enduring threads that bind humanity across time, space, and story.